The courtroom was laughing at me. Not politely, not nervously, actually laughing. The judge leaned back in his chair and shook his head as he flipped through the file in front of him. She runs a laundromat and thinks she can handle $30 million. The sound echoed across the room. A few people chuckled. A few more joined in. Then my father smiled. "That's right, Your Honor," he said. "She can't even deal with a lawyer." More laughter. I sat perfectly still. My hands rested in my lap. My expression never changed. Because while everyone in that courtroom thought they knew who I was, they were all looking at the smallest chapter of my life. They saw a laundromat owner. They saw a middle-aged woman from Texas. They saw a daughter challenging her wealthy father. What they didn't see was the woman who had spent 15 years managing military supply operations across 3 war zones. They didn't see the classified reports. They didn't see the billions of dollars that had passed under my supervision. And they certainly didn't know the secret buried inside the file my father had just demanded the court open. A secret that within minutes would drain every ounce of color from his face. A secret so devastating that before the day was over, my father would collapse right there in front of everyone. My name is Caroline Adams, and this is the story of how the man who spent his entire life underestimating me finally discovered who I really was. The first time I realized my father loved my brother differently, I was 8 years old. It was Christmas morning in Dallas. The living room smelled like pine needles, cinnamon candles, and the turkey my mother had been preparing since dawn. My younger brother Ethan tore through wrapping paper while Dad watched him with pride. "Look at that," Dad laughed. "That boy's got ambition." Ethan had opened a toy cash register. I had opened a book about aviation. I remember holding it up. "Dad, look." He glanced over for less than a second. "That's nice, sweetheart." Then his attention returned to Ethan. At 8 years old, I didn't understand favoritism. I only understood that one gift seemed to matter more than the other. As the years passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. When Ethan got a B, Dad celebrated. When I got straight A's, he nodded. When Ethan scored a goal in soccer, Dad told everyone. When I won an academic competition, Dad forgot the ceremony entirely. My mother tried to balance things. She truly did. But Richard Adams filled every room he entered. Successful attorneys tend to develop gravity. People orbit them. My father was one of those men. He walked into a room expecting agreement and usually got it. By high school, Ethan had become the center of Dad's universe. The future Adams legacy. The future businessman. The future success story. I became the practical daughter. The reliable one. The quiet one. The one who never caused problems. One night during my senior year, I sat across from Dad at the dinner table. "I want to join the Army." The room went silent. My mother lowered her fork. Ethan stared at me. Dad laughed. Actually laughed. "No." I blinked. "No. You're not joining the Army. I've already spoken to a recruiter. You're going to law school." His voice carried the same certainty he used in court. The certainty that expected compliance. "I don't want to be a lawyer." "You don't know what you want." "Yes, I do." His jaw tightened. Caroline, smart women don't throw their futures away. That sentence stayed with me for years. Smart women. Not smart people. Smart women. As if there were separate rules. As if my future belonged to someone else. 3 months later, I enlisted anyway. Dad didn't speak to me for nearly 6 months. The day I left for training, he didn't come to the airport. My mother cried. Ethan hugged me. Dad stayed home. I told myself it didn't hurt. That was a lie. The Army changed me. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Slowly. Like water shaping stone. I discovered that competence mattered more than image. That results mattered more than titles. That respect was earned daily. I specialized in logistics. Most people hear the word and imagine paperwork. They don't understand that wars are won or lost through logistics. Troops can't fight without fuel. Vehicles can't move without parts. Medical units can't save lives without supplies. I loved the complexity of it. The challenge. The responsibility. Years passed. Deployments came and went. Afghanistan. Kuwait. Iraq. Places where temperatures melted equipment and every mistake carried consequences. While other people saw warehouses, I saw systems. While others saw inventory, I saw lives depending on it. Promotions followed. Commendations followed. Responsibilities grew larger. Each achievement felt meaningful. But there was always one person whose approval remained absent. My father. I mailed him photos from overseas, rarely received responses. I invited him to ceremonies. He was always busy. I earned awards. He never attended. One evening after returning home from a deployment, I visited my parents. Dad was hosting a dinner party. The guests included attorneys, investors, and local business leaders. Someone asked about my military career. Before I could answer, Dad smiled. "Caroline moves boxes for the army." The table laughed politely. I laughed too, but inside something cracked. Not because he mocked me. Because after all those years, he still had no idea what I actually did. Meanwhile, Ethan was becoming exactly what Dad wanted. Or at least what Dad imagined. He launched businesses. Failed. Started another. Failed again. Opened a restaurant. Closed within a year. Invested in a startup. Lost nearly everything. Each disaster somehow became someone else's fault. And every time Dad rescued him, checks appeared. Loans disappeared. New opportunities materialized. It became a family joke. If Ethan jumped off a cliff, Dad would build him a parachute on the way down. As for me, I invested carefully, quietly, methodically. A few years before retirement from active service, I purchased a laundromat. Nothing glamorous, just a clean neighborhood business. Blue Sky Laundromat. The place smelled like detergent, warm cotton, and fresh coffee. I liked it immediately. People underestimated laundromats, but they generated steady cash flow. Families depended on them. The work was honest, predictable, real. The day Dad visited, he looked around as if I'd purchased a landfill. "This is what you're doing now. It's a good business." He shook his head. "After all those years." I folded a towel. "What? You ended up washing other people's clothes?" I remember smiling. Not because it was funny, because arguing felt pointless. People only see what they're prepared to see. Dad had already decided who I was decades earlier. Then came the event that changed everything. My Uncle William died unexpectedly. He had never married, never had children, and over a lifetime of successful investments, he accumulated an estate worth nearly $30 million. The family gathered expecting a straightforward inheritance process. William had loved all of us, especially me. We talked often. He respected my military career. Unlike my father, he listened. So when the estate documents arrived, I expected fairness. Not favoritism, not miracles, just fairness. Instead, I opened the paperwork and felt my stomach drop. Properties, investment accounts, partnership interests, trust distributions. Almost everything flowed toward Ethan. My share was so small it felt intentional, not accidental. Intentional. I stared at the numbers for a long time. Then I looked again. Then a third time. Because something wasn't right. William would never have done this. Not willingly. And for the first time in my life, I began to wonder whether my father had done more than underestimate me. I began to wonder whether he had cheated me. And that suspicion would lead directly to the courtroom where everyone laughed. A courtroom where my father still believed I was the weakest person in the room. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The first person who told me I might actually have a case wasn't a family member. It wasn't a friend. And it certainly wasn't anyone named Adams. It was a probate attorney named Laura Mitchell. 3 days after receiving Uncle William's estate documents, I sat across from her in a modest office overlooking downtown Dallas. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Laura spent nearly 40 minutes reading without saying much. Occasionally, she highlighted a section. Occasionally, she frowned. I waited. Years in the military had taught me patience. Eventually, she placed the file on her desk. "This doesn't feel right." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" She tapped several pages. "Your uncle's historical records don't match this distribution pattern." I leaned forward. "Can you explain that? He spent years naming you and Ethan almost equally in previous estate planning documents." I stared at her. "Almost equally?" She nodded. "Very close." The silence stretched between us. For the first time since receiving the documents, I felt something stronger than confusion. I felt suspicion. Laura continued. "Large asset transfers occurred during the final 18 months before his death." "What kind of transfers?" "Properties, investment holdings, trust adjustments." I already knew the answer before she spoke it. "Who benefited?" "Ethan." The word landed like a stone. I looked through the office window toward the city skyline. The buildings shimmered beneath the Texas sun. Cars moved below. People went about their lives. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of my family was shifting. Because if Laura was correct, this wasn't merely favoritism. It was planning. Deliberate planning. The kind that happened behind closed doors. The kind that left paper trails. The kind lawyers created. My father was a lawyer. A very good one. And suddenly that fact felt less reassuring than it once had. "Can we challenge it?" I asked. Laura folded her hands. "Possibly." "Possibly? Caroline challenging an estate of this size means challenging powerful people. I almost laughed. Powerful people. For 15 years, I'd worked around generals, defense contractors, congressional oversight committees, and federal auditors. Power didn't intimidate me. Dishonesty did. I want the truth. Laura studied me for several seconds. Then she nodded. Okay. That single word launched a war. The family reaction arrived almost immediately. Apparently, news traveled faster through wealthy families than through military communication networks. My aunt called first, then 2 cousins, then Ethan. The conversations followed nearly identical patterns. Shock, disapproval, accusations. You're making a mistake. Your father is trying to protect the family. William knew what he was doing. Don't embarrass everyone. By the 4th phone call, I noticed something interesting. No one actually addressed the evidence. Nobody wanted facts. They wanted obedience. The same obedience my father had expected my entire life. But I was no longer 18 years old. And I wasn't asking permission. The most painful conversation came from my mother. She called late one evening. I was closing Blue Sky Laundromat. The last dryers hummed softly in the background. Outside rain tapped against the windows. Caroline. Her voice sounded tired. Older. Hi, Mom. A pause. Then a sigh. Does it have to go this far? I closed my eyes. Did Dad send you? No. That answer arrived too quickly. We both knew she was lying. I just want peace. So do I. Then let it go. I stared at rows of neatly folded towels. Thousands of ordinary moments had happened inside that building. Parents doing laundry after soccer games. Retirees chatting over coffee. Single mothers managing impossible schedules. Nobody there cared about inheritance battles. Nobody cared about status. And somehow that simple reality made everything clearer. I can't, Mom. Another long silence. Then quietly. Your father won't back down. Neither will I. But I didn't say those words. I simply listened to her breathe. Because despite everything, I loved her. A month later, the legal battle officially began. The first hearing attracted more attention than I expected. Wealthy families always fascinated people, especially when they started fighting publicly. The courthouse buzzed with whispers. Reporters, observers, attorneys, curious spectators. I arrived early. Military habit. Laura joined me near the courtroom entrance. You okay? I adjusted my jacket. Fine, she smiled slightly. That's the most military answer I've ever heard. The doors opened. People filed inside. And there he was. Richard Adams. My father, standing with absolute confidence, expensive suit, perfect posture, the same courtroom presence that had intimidated opponents for 40 years. When our eyes met, his expression remained unreadable, cold, professional, not father and daughter, plaintiff and adversary. For reasons I still struggle to explain, that hurt more than I expected. The hearing began. Arguments were presented. Procedural matters discussed. Documents reviewed. Nothing dramatic. Not yet. Then the judge requested background information on all involved parties. That simple request changed everything. A court clerk handed over summary files. The judge reviewed Ethan's first. Businessman, investor, entrepreneur. The description sounded impressive, until you examined the details. Then he reached mine. He adjusted his glasses, read silently, then suddenly chuckled. The sound echoed through the courtroom. What is this? A few people looked up. The judge smiled. Ms. Adams currently owns a laundromat. Murmurs spread. I felt dozens of eyes turned toward me. That's correct, Your Honor, Laura said. The judge leaned back. Then came the sentence that would later spread through the family like wildfire. She runs a laundromat and thinks she can handle $30 million. Laughter erupted. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to hear. Enough to feel. Enough to remember forever. For a brief moment, I was 8 years old again. Standing beside a Christmas tree, watching people admire Ethan. Then my father decided to join in. He rose slowly, confidently, almost casually. That's right, Your Honor. More laughter. His smile widened. She can't even deal with a lawyer. The room reacted exactly as he'd hoped. People laughed again. Even a few attorneys. I looked directly at him. He never looked away. And in that instant, I understood something important. My father truly believed his own narrative. He genuinely believed I was outmatched, that I was emotional, naive, out of my depth. He didn't see an opponent. He saw a daughter who had forgotten her place. Laura leaned toward me. You okay? I nodded. Because anger would accomplish nothing. Embarrassment would accomplish nothing. The truth didn't change simply because a room full of strangers laughed. The hearing continued. More motions. More discussions. More procedural details. Then Richard made a decision that would ultimately destroy his case. He stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, we'd like full disclosure regarding Ms. Adams's financial and professional history. Laura immediately objected. The judge considered it, then asked for justification. My father smiled. The smile of a man convinced victory was already his. We intend to demonstrate that Ms. Adams lacks the experience necessary to manage assets of this magnitude. The request sounded reasonable, even logical. The judge approved it. My father looked satisfied, almost triumphant. Across the room, Ethan grinned. They thought they had won something. Neither of them understood what they had just requested. Because hidden inside my professional records were 15 years of details my father had never bothered to learn, responsibilities he never asked about, achievements he never cared enough to investigate. The truth. The complete truth. And for the first time in my life, Richard Adams had personally demanded to see it. As people began leaving the courtroom, Laura gathered her files. A small smile appeared on her face. What? She looked toward my father. Your dad just made a very expensive mistake. Outside, thunder rolled across the Texas sky. Rain clouds gathered above the courthouse. I watched my father walk confidently toward his car. He looked like a man heading toward victory. But victory was moving in the opposite direction, straight toward him. And soon he would open a file that contained the one thing he had spent an entire lifetime avoiding: the reality of who his daughter had become. For the next 6 weeks, my father acted like a man who had already won. Word traveled through the family grapevine faster than any official court filing. According to various relatives, Richard Adams was simply waiting for the evidence to expose me. Apparently, I was supposed to be embarrassed, supposed to withdraw the lawsuit, supposed to realize that I was outmatched. Instead, I spent those weeks exactly the way I always handled pressure. I worked. Every morning before sunrise, I unlocked the doors at Blue Sky Laundromat. The familiar scent of detergent greeted me. The fluorescent lights flickered to life. Industrial washers hummed quietly. There was something comforting about routine. Laundry didn't care about inheritance disputes. Machines didn't care about family politics. A washer either worked or it didn't. A dryer either heated properly or it didn't. Simple. Honest. Unlike people. One morning while I was helping an elderly customer carry a basket to her car, Laura called. I could hear excitement in her voice immediately. We received the disclosure package. I set the basket into the woman's trunk. Everything. My pulse quickened. And a pause. Then Laura laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Not a mocking laugh. The kind that comes when someone unexpectedly discovers a winning hand. Caroline, your father has absolutely no idea what he just asked for. The second hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. Unlike the first hearing, this one focused heavily on financial competency and asset management. The courtroom was fuller than before. People love watching family conflicts, particularly wealthy family conflicts. By the time I arrived, nearly every seat was occupied. Reporters sat near the back. Several extended family members attended. Even Ethan showed up wearing a smile that suggested he expected a celebration. When my father entered, he looked exactly as he always had. Perfectly composed. Perfectly confident. Perfectly certain. For a brief moment, I wondered whether he had reviewed the documents himself. Maybe he had. Maybe he simply didn't understand them. Or maybe he understood exactly what they contained and was pretending otherwise. The hearing began. Several routine matters were addressed first. Then the judge turned toward Richard's legal team. You requested disclosure regarding Ms. Adams's qualifications and experience. Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Proceed. One of my father's attorneys stood. A younger man. Sharp suit. Expensive watch. The kind of lawyer who still believed confidence could substitute for preparation. He opened a large folder. Ms. Adams currently operates a laundromat. A few people smiled. The attorney continued. She has no significant experience in high-value private investment management. Laura remained silent. The attorney flipped another page. Then another. Then another. Suddenly his expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. A slight pause. A slight furrow in his brow. The first crack. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, it appears there are additional records. The judge looked interested. What records? The attorney hesitated, and that hesitation immediately captured the room's attention. Nobody expected hesitation from Richard Adams's team. Finally, he answered. Military records? I sat quietly. Across the courtroom, my father watched with mild annoyance. He still looked unconcerned. The attorney continued reading. The silence grew heavier with every passing second. Ms. Adams served 15 years as a logistics officer. The judge nodded. Go on. The attorney swallowed. During overseas deployments, she supervised supply distribution networks across multiple operational theaters. Another pause. More pages turning. Then another pause. The judge leaned forward. What exactly did she supervise? The attorney glanced down again. I could almost see the moment he wished someone else were handling the presentation. Large-scale military procurement operations. The judge waited. So, the attorney took a breath. Operations involving annual budgets exceeding several $billions. The courtroom became very quiet. The kind of quiet that feels physical. Like pressure changing before a storm. The judge removed his glasses. I beg your pardon. The attorney looked uncomfortable. According to Department of Defense records, Ms. Adams participated in oversight and coordination involving assets valued in excess of $12 billion. A woman in the gallery actually gasped. The judge stared at me, then back at the attorney, then back at me. I remembered his earlier laughter, his joke about the laundromat. The room remembered too. Suddenly, nobody seemed amused anymore. The attorney continued, and things only became worse for my father's case. Or better for mine, depending on perspective. My military evaluations entered evidence. Performance reviews, commendations, operational assessments. Every page painted the same picture. Reliable, exceptional, trusted, capable. One evaluation described me as indispensable during a major supply crisis overseas. Another praised my management of emergency logistics involving thousands of personnel. A third noted that I had successfully coordinated resources across multiple international partners. The language was professional, measured, military, yet somehow it carried more weight than exaggeration ever could. Because military evaluations are not written to flatter. They are written to document reality. Then Laura stood. Your Honor, we'd like to call a witness. The judge nodded. Proceed. The courtroom doors opened, and General Michael Reeves entered. Even after retirement, he possessed the unmistakable presence of a senior military leader. People sat straighter. Conversation stopped. The general took the oath, then settled into the witness chair. Laura approached. General Reeves, how long have you known Caroline Adams? Approximately 13 years. And in what capacity? She served under my command. Laura nodded. Would you describe her responsibilities? The general didn't hesitate. Some of the most complex logistics operations in the military. Several jurists exchanged glances. Laura continued. Can you elaborate? The general folded his hands. Most civilians don't understand military logistics. A faint smile appeared on his face. They imagine warehouses and paperwork. A few people chuckled nervously. Then his expression hardened. In reality, logistics determines whether soldiers live or die. The room fell silent again. The general pointed toward me. Colonel Adams managed operations that affected thousands of service members. My father froze. The title seemed to hit him physically. Colonel. Not officer. Not employee. Colonel. The judge noticed it too. Colonel. Laura nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I saw confusion cross my father's face. Real confusion. Because he genuinely hadn't known. All those years. All those deployments. All those ceremonies. And he didn't know my rank. The realization visibly unsettled him. General Reeves continued speaking. If I needed someone to manage $10 billion worth of critical national assets, Colonel Adams would be among the first people I'd call. No one laughed. Not anymore. The atmosphere had completely transformed. Hours earlier, I had been the laundromat owner, the daughter who couldn't handle money, the woman who couldn't handle a lawyer. Now people were looking at me differently, not because I had changed, because the truth had finally entered the room. But the most devastating moment was still ahead. Laura introduced one final group of documents: personnel recommendations, special assignments, federal contract evaluations. My father requested copies. As he reviewed them, I watched his expression slowly deteriorate. Confidence faded first, then certainty, then arrogance. His eyes moved from page to page, line after line, fact after fact, evidence after evidence. The daughter he thought washed clothes for a living had managed responsibilities beyond anything Ethan had ever touched, beyond anything Ethan would likely ever touch. For the first time since the lawsuit began, my father looked frightened. Not of losing money, not of losing the case, something deeper. Something far more painful. He looked like a man beginning to realize he had spent decades misunderstanding his own child, and the worst discovery was still buried inside the remaining documents waiting to be revealed. By the time the third major hearing arrived, the atmosphere inside the courthouse had changed completely. The laughter was gone. The smirks were gone. Even the reporters seemed less interested in the inheritance fight itself, and more interested in the growing mystery surrounding Richard Adams and his daughter. People had started asking questions. How could a father know so little about a child who had spent years serving her country? How could a successful attorney underestimate someone with that level of responsibility? The answers, as it turned out, were far uglier than anyone expected, including me. The morning of the hearing, Texas skies were gray. Rain tapped softly against the courthouse windows. The weather seemed strangely appropriate. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Like something unavoidable was approaching. I arrived early. Laura was already there. She stood beside a stack of binders nearly 2 feet tall. When she saw me, her expression was serious. "No surprises today." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" "We finally got the internal correspondence." I immediately understood. Emails, letters, draft documents, the conversations nobody expected outsiders to see. The private thoughts behind the public decisions. The truth. Laura lowered her voice. "Caroline, some of this is going to hurt." I nodded. "I know. But I didn't know. Not really. There is a difference between suspecting someone has betrayed you and reading proof of it in their own words." The courtroom filled quickly. My mother sat near the back. She looked exhausted, smaller somehow, as though the last several months had aged her years. Ethan arrived a few minutes later. For the first time since this began, he looked nervous. Not guilty, not remorseful, nervous. Because even he could sense the direction things were moving. Then my father entered. His confidence had diminished noticeably since the previous hearing. Not completely. Richard Adams was not the kind of man who surrendered easily. But something had changed. The certainty was gone. The room noticed it. I noticed it. Most importantly, he noticed it. The hearing began. Laura stood first. "Your Honor, we would like to present evidence concerning the estate restructuring process." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Several documents appeared on screens throughout the courtroom. Trust amendments, property transfers, financial restructuring agreements, complex legal paperwork. The kind of paperwork designed to hide intentions behind technical language. At first glance, everything appeared legitimate. But appearances can be deceptive. Laura walked slowly toward the screen. "Your Honor, we believe these transactions were not motivated by estate planning efficiency." The judge looked up. What were they motivated by? Laura clicked a button. A new document appeared. An email, dated nearly 2 years before Uncle William's death. Sent by Richard Adams. My father. The room became silent. Laura began reading. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Simply reading the words exactly as written. Words my father never expected anyone else to see. Words that changed everything. The email discussed inheritance planning, asset distribution, family succession. Then came the sentence that sucked all the air from the room. "I do not want family assets ultimately controlled by Caroline." Silence. Absolute silence. The judge stared at the screen. Laura continued. Another sentence. "She lacks the instincts necessary for serious business." A third. "Ethan is the natural successor." The gallery shifted uncomfortably. But Laura wasn't finished. Not even close. She displayed another email. Then another. Then another. Each one revealed the same pattern, the same prejudice, the same assumption. Again and again. My father dismissed my abilities, ignored my accomplishments, minimized my experience, not because he lacked information, because he had already made his decision. Years earlier, long before any inheritance dispute existed. Then came the email that broke whatever remained of his defense. Laura displayed it. Nobody spoke. The words stood there for everyone to read, including my father. Including me. "I will not allow millions of dollars to end up in the hands of a woman who doesn't understand business." The room froze. My mother covered her mouth. Ethan looked down. The judge removed his glasses slowly, very slowly, as if giving himself time to process what he had just read. Then he looked directly at my father. "Did you write this?" Richard hesitated, for perhaps the first time in his professional life. A man famous for answers suddenly had none. Finally, he nodded. "Yes." The judge's expression hardened. There are moments when entire cases shift. Not legally. Morally. This was one of them. My father was no longer defending estate decisions. He was defending discrimination. And everyone knew it. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired, deeply tired, because none of this was really about money. Not for me. Never for me. It was about recognition, respect, the simple desire to be seen honestly. And sitting there listening to those emails, I realized something painful. My father had never actually known me. Not once. Not ever. He had known the version of me he created inside his own head. A version that stopped evolving when I was 18 years old. Laura called one final witness, an estate planning specialist. His testimony was straightforward. The restructuring process had no meaningful financial advantage, no tax advantage, no strategic necessity. The primary result was simple. Caroline received less, Ethan received more. That was it. That was the purpose. That was the plan. When the witness stepped down, the judge looked irritated. Actually irritated. A dangerous thing for any attorney. Especially an attorney who had spent decades appearing before judges. Then Laura stood once more. "We have one final matter, Your Honor." The courtroom seemed to lean forward collectively. Even the reporters stopped writing. Laura approached my father. Her voice remained calm, professional, controlled. "Mr. Adams, may I ask a question?" He nodded. "Do you know your daughter's military rank?" The question sounded absurdly simple. My father blinked. Nobody moved. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. Finally, he answered. "No." The word barely emerged. Laura nodded. "Do you know how many military commendations she has received?" Silence. Again. "No." "Do you know how many personnel served under her command during her career?" His eyes dropped toward the table. "No." The courtroom became unbearably quiet. Laura asked one final question. The simplest question of all. "Mr. Adams, do you know your daughter?" Something happened then. Not externally. Internally. You could see it. The moment a lifetime of assumptions collided with reality. My father stared at the documents spread before him. Military evaluations, commendations, leadership assessments, letters of recommendation, evidence, proof, an entire life he had never bothered to examine. His hands began trembling. At first slightly, then visibly. The judge noticed. I noticed. Everyone noticed. Richard picked up one of the files. His eyes scanned the pages again, and again, and again, almost desperately, as though he were searching for a different answer, a different daughter, a different truth. But there wasn't one, only reality. For decades he had celebrated Ethan's potential, while ignoring my achievements. For decades he had called Ethan a businessman despite repeated failures, while dismissing me despite repeated success. For decades he had chosen a story over the truth, and now that truth was sitting directly in front of him, unavoidable, merciless, complete. His breathing became uneven. My mother rose halfway from her seat. "Richard." He didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the documents. Then suddenly I saw tears, tiny, almost invisible, but unmistakable. The first tears I had ever seen my father shed. His lips moved. At first no sound emerged, then finally a whisper. "Oh my God." The courtroom remained frozen. He looked toward me. Not through me, at me. Perhaps for the first time in his life, and in that moment I saw something I never expected to see. Regret. Raw. Unfiltered. Devastating regret. His voice cracked. "She's..." The sentence never finished. His face turned pale. The color vanished completely. One hand reached for the edge of the table. The other pressed against his chest. Several people stood simultaneously. "Richard." Then his knees buckled. His body collapsed sideways. Gasps filled the courtroom. Papers scattered across the floor. My mother screamed his name. Court officers rushed forward. Paramedics were called. And as chaos erupted around us, I remained seated. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't move. For years I had imagined confronting my father, winning, proving him wrong. I had never imagined it would look like this. I had never imagined that the moment he finally understood who I was would also be the moment it nearly broke him. The courtroom victory came 3 weeks later. My father wasn't there to hear it. He was recovering in a cardiac rehabilitation unit outside Dallas. The doctors called it a stress-induced cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, not a stroke, but serious enough to force a man like Richard Adams to stop running from himself. For the first time in decades, he had no courtroom to dominate. No negotiations to control, no arguments to win, only silence. And sometimes silence is the most brutal teacher of all. The judge's ruling was thorough, methodical, unambiguous. After reviewing the evidence, the court determined that significant portions of the estate restructuring had been improperly influenced. The inheritance distribution was ordered to be recalculated. Several transferred assets were returned to the estate. Trust provisions were modified. Financial allocations were corrected. When everything was finalized, the outcome reflected what Uncle William had originally intended years earlier. Fairness. Not favoritism. Not manipulation. Fairness. Reporters waited outside the courthouse. Microphones appeared. Questions flew from every direction. Colonel Adams, how does it feel to win? Are you satisfied with the ruling? What would you like to say to your father? I answered only one question. I never wanted to defeat my family. Then I walked away. Because that was the truth. People often imagine revenge as a moment of celebration, a dramatic victory, a triumphant ending. Real life rarely works that way. Winning doesn't magically erase old wounds. It doesn't rewrite childhood memories. It doesn't restore years that were lost. Sometimes winning simply confirms what you already knew. And sometimes that confirmation feels surprisingly lonely. The family changed after the ruling. Not immediately. Families rarely change immediately, but slowly, like ice beginning to melt. Several relatives called to apologize. Others didn't. A few disappeared entirely. I was fine with that. Some relationships survive truth. Others don't. The biggest change involved Ethan. For weeks after the ruling, he blamed everyone except himself. The judge, the lawyers, the court, me, the estate planners. Bad luck. Anything. Everything. One afternoon he showed up at Blue Sky Laundromat. The bell above the door chimed softly. I looked up from folding towels. For a moment we simply stared at each other. Neither of us spoke. The washers hummed in the background. Children laughed near the vending machines. Life continued around us. Finally Ethan sat down. He looked older. Tired. Not physically. Emotionally. I used to think Dad believed in me. I set the towel aside. He did. Ethan laughed bitterly. No. He shook his head. He believed in who he wanted me to be. The honesty surprised me. He stared at the floor. Do you know what it's like spending your entire life being told you're special? I remained quiet. Eventually you stop trying. His voice softened. You start expecting things. For the first time I saw not the spoiled younger brother who had benefited from favoritism. I saw a man damaged by it, not excused. Damaged. There is a difference. Before leaving he looked at me. I should have been your brother. You are my brother. No, his eyes glistened. I should have acted like it. Then he walked out. And somehow that conversation healed more than the court ruling ever could. A month later my mother called. Your father wants to see you. The request sat heavily between us. I knew this moment was coming. I simply didn't know whether I was ready. The rehabilitation center sat on the edge of a quiet lake. The afternoon sun reflected off the water. Birds drifted across the surface. Everything felt peaceful. Strangely peaceful. When I entered his room, I barely recognized him. Not because he looked ill. Because he looked smaller. The enormous presence that had filled every room for my entire life seemed diminished. Human. Fragile. My father looked up. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he gestured toward the chair beside his bed. Please, I sat. The silence stretched. Finally, he spoke. I spent 40 years believing I understood people. His voice sounded rough. I made a living judging character? He laughed softly. A sad laugh. And I completely misjudged my own daughter. I listened. He swallowed hard. There isn't a day of your life I can get back. His eyes filled with tears. I missed everything. The words emerged slowly, painfully. I missed your promotions. A pause. I missed your achievements. Another pause. I missed knowing who you became. For years I had imagined hearing those words. I thought they would feel satisfying. Instead, they felt heartbreaking. Because they were true. Every word. My father lowered his head. I'm sorry. Not a legal apology. Not a strategic apology. Not a carefully constructed statement. A real apology. Perhaps the first one he had ever given. We talked for nearly 3 hours. About childhood. About Mom. About Uncle William. About the Army. About things fathers and daughters should discuss over decades, but somehow never do. When I finally stood to leave, he stopped me. Caroline? I turned. His eyes met mine. I was proud of you. A small smile touched his face. I just realized it far too late. I walked outside and sat beside the lake for a long time. watching sunlight dance across the water, thinking about everything that had happened, thinking about how complicated love can be, how destructive pride can be, how expensive assumptions can become. In the months that followed, I received my portion of the inheritance. It was more money than I had ever expected to possess. Enough to retire comfortably. Enough to disappear if I wanted. I didn't. Instead, I created a foundation supporting veterans transitioning into civilian careers. I funded scholarships for military families. I invested in workforce training programs throughout Texas. And every morning I still visited Blue Sky Laundromat. Customers often asked why. The answer was simple. Because that place reminded me who I was. Not Colonel Adams, not an heir, not a plaintiff, not a headline. Just Caroline, a woman who believed honest work mattered. The irony still makes me smile. People laughed because I owned a laundromat. Yet that little business taught me lessons worth far more than $30 million. It taught me dignity, patience, humility, and perhaps most importantly, it taught me never to measure a person's value by their job title. Because titles can mislead, appearances can deceive, and sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the strongest person in the room. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known you best? Leave a comment below and share your story. And wherever you're watching from today, let us know in the comments. We have many more powerful stories about family resilience and second chances to share with you, so subscribe and join us for the next journey. Until then, take care of yourself and never let someone else's opinion define your worth.